A very significant severe weather event is on the way tomorrow, a severe weather outbreak with very large hail, gusty winds, and strong to intense tornadoes. This will be one of the biggest severe weather days of the year so far. We have unbelievable amounts of energy surging north. Cape values will be through the roof, so all the ingredients are really priming in place. We also have a lot of wind shear, so the tornado risk will be especially heightened across the corridor. Not only that though, we're talking about a winter storm over the Rockies, we're talking about a fire weather concern over Texas and parts of the desert southwest, and some record heat, some colder weather coming in. We really have all the seasons coming together this week. It's going to be a very active week of weather. Today is Monday, May 18th, and in the world of weather, I'll break down all the impacts from all these various events in this very complicated weather pattern. So first off, one of the biggest things that's causing all of the crazy weather is really just the clash between the seasons. This map is the temperature anomaly, how far above or below average temperatures are, and we have two very different air masses colliding over the northern US from Canada. We still have the last kind of remnants of winter coming in. It's not going to be winter like air it's made, but it will be some colder air clashing with all this warm summer air that's coming out ahead of it. What causes all of our dynamic weather, what causes a lot of our crazy severe weather in the spring, it's a clash between the two air masses as the atmosphere changes from the colder to the warmer as we get deeper into the summer months. So that's going to be very distinct, and this very big contrast, this very big clash creates a lot of energy and instability, and it's going to lead to some very wild weather across much of the country over the next week. In tandem with that colder air mass coming in is we also have some upper level energy, and we have a wavy jet stream. The jet stream is going to be dipping down into the US before riding up into the east coast. This is called a trough of low pressure, and when this ejects eastward, this brings a lot of energy and a lot of upper level support for storm development. So jet streams that bring storm, think of them like railroad tracks. Storms ride on the jet stream. And the fact that it's positioned right over the center of the country, this means that any of these stronger upper level winds, when you combine that with a lot of the ingredients in place, it's just going to cause a bad severe weather day, especially for tomorrow across the Central Plains. So here it is. This is a recording as of Sunday evening, and we have a 4 out of 5 day 2 moderate risk across a portion of central Kansas. So it's pretty rare to get these moderate risk days. We only get a handful of them every year. The fact that we have one 2 days out in advance means there's above normal confidence that this will be a significant severe weather event. So we're talking about north of Wichita, from Manhattan, Kansas, all the way up to Auburn, Nebraska, south of Omaha, south of Lincoln, just to the west of Kansas City. This is where the highest corridor of tornadoes and very, very large hail is possible. I'll break down the specific threats in a minute. Even in the enhanced risk, so which does include Omaha and Kansas City up into central Iowa, watch out for a dangerous severe weather day. And then we have a huge slight risk that goes all the way from Texas up into Chicago and parts of the Midwest. This is where scattered strong to severe thunderstorms are possible. Now, by the time we're watching this, to me this looks like one of the days where it's possible we get an upgrade to a high risk somewhere in this area and our moderate risk gets expanded. So stay tuned to the weather for updates. High risk days are very rare, and they signal very high confidence in very impactful severe weather. These typically only occur 2 to 3 times in the whole year and need to be treated very seriously. So as of this recording, there is no high risk, but you'll want to check in with the latest forecast if that is issued. Either way, this looks significant. So moderate risk or not, high risk or not, we want to make sure we have a plan in place because significant, potentially life-threatening severe weather is possible later on Monday. The tornado risk is particularly concerning. We already have a SIG 2 tornado risk in these double dashed lines. So in this area I just circled, this does include Salina, Kansas, which just got hammered by severe weather yesterday, all the way up to Marysville, Beatrice. Watch out where EF3 plus tornadoes are possible. These are violent to intense tornadoes that could potentially level homes and cause destruction, and if not, be deadly. So we want to really make sure that we are paying attention to the weather in this area and have a plan in place if that tornado warning is issued. Even in this much broader hatch area, EF2 tornadoes are possible, so we still want to be on the guard. The tornado risk is definitely there, and also the threat for longer track tornadoes is possible, at least briefly, upon the onset of this event. So there's a very high ceiling for this, where if the environmental conditions line up like we think they will right now, we could have 1 or 2 long track intense tornadoes possible, and that's why we really want to make sure everyone is paying attention to the weather. The other primary threat will be hail. Once again, if you're in this double dash line, that's where the greatest intensity of hail is expected. Softball size hail or greater, 3.5 inches in diameter. That's more than enough to smash windshields, but when hail that big is falling from the sky, that is life threatening. If you get struck by those those hailstones, that could be very dangerous. This could also cause extensive property damage and definitely vehicle damage. So make sure we're bringing the vehicles inside. This does include Omaha, Lincoln, Topeka, Wichita, pretty much central Kansas into portions of southeastern Nebraska, especially in the pink color. That's where the highest coverage is. But all the way up into Wisconsin, all the way down into Texas, there is a threat for large hail. As a result, what these two things will mean is our energy values will be off the charts. This is going to be a corridor. The HRRR model has been very consistent in signaling a corridor across central Kansas of extreme CAPE values. So if we zoom in here, some of these numbers, 5,000 to 6,000 joules per kilogram in that white shade, that is just off the charts. This is very explosive, where if a storm forms in this environment where we can get some of our CAPE maximized, all the ingredients come together, we could have a very destructive tornado. Very large hail is possible, so that's why we're worried. But even across this broader corridor, all this yellow and red, that's 3,000 to 4,000 joules per kilogram, and that is more than enough for severe weather. So we have a very high ceiling. If some of these values are realized, unfortunately, I do think we could be looking at widespread destructive severe storms possible in this region. Don't let this scare you. If we have a plan in place, we'll be okay. We just need to make sure that people are paying attention to this and don't write this off as just any ordinary event, because this has the potential to be one of the higher end events of the year. We just have a lot of energy in this area. As such, the tornado risk is also very high as that upper level trough ejects. We're going to get wind shear, varying heights in the atmosphere at loft, and we're going to have a point, it's called the triple point, where we have a cold front, a dry line, and a warm front. And kind of in the intersection between these 3 points, that's where an isolated localized maximum of severe weather is possible. So on the significant tornado parameter, there is a small corridor here where we have some red, even purple values. This is values of 6, 7, or 8. The scale goes up to 14, but anything above 5, that's significant. Anything above 8, this just means the environment is conducive not only for regular tornadoes, but for the strong tornadoes, EF3+. So that's something we're watching across this region. And yeah, all the ingredients are just coming together for an impactful severe weather day. So let's time it all out. The tricky thing is we're going to have some morning convection ongoing. This is a leftover from yesterday's severe weather. We had some widespread damaging winds, unfortunately some destructive tornadoes across the central plains. Well, the leftover complex will be moving down through St. Louis in Missouri all the way to Illinois. So a bit of a stormy morning commute. Immediately behind this line, there'll be a brief period where the atmosphere is stabilized and takes a little bit to recover. So this is why further to the east, the severe weather risk is a little bit lower. However, as we get into the afternoon, this is now 3 o'clock, we could get a squall line redeveloping across the Midwest. This is not the main severe weather risk, but within this line, certainly gusty winds, large hail, maybe an isolated spin-up tornado is possible. Also, some of this activity further into Missouri, this looks potentially hazardous for some gusty winds and small hail. So even if you're not in that main risk, there is still the risk for storms, and you'll want to pay attention to that. All eyes though will be focusing across central Kansas. Look at these little blips on the radar that are popping up at 3 o'clock. This is the beginning of our moderate severe weather risk. Just like that, they explode. This is now 4 o'clock. We're going to have a cold front with all that colder air approaching. Out ahead of that front, that's where the risk is highest for discrete supercells. Any of these cells, they have all this warm, moist environment to tap into as they travel to the east. This is where the potential for a long track sustained tornado, potentially a higher end tornado, is possible. So we're watching this very closely, especially on the southern edge of this line. Any of these cells here could contain very large hail, softball sized hail again, and that very strong tornado risk. So this is now 6 o'clock, between 3 to 6, that's kind of the highest window of greatest concern. At some point, the cold front will catch up and storms will organize into more of a line. And when that happens, the tornado risk will go down and will be more of a damaging wind threat with more isolated embedded circulations. We're hoping that this actually occurs sooner, because that'll cut off the chance for some of these longer track tornadoes. If this happens a little bit slower though, then those individual supercells could sustain themselves for longer without greater tornado risk. So there's still a lot of questions into exactly how this will play out, but we do know the ingredients are in place, and if you're anywhere in this region Monday afternoon, Monday evening, this is definitely something worth rearranging your plans for, because this could be very significant. As we head through the rest of the evening into the overnight, everything is now consolidated into a line, moving through Kansas into Missouri, a second round of rain. Everything will continue moving east in a squall line, bringing gusty winds across Oklahoma, Missouri, and sliding south on Tuesday. So on Tuesday, we'll have that big cold front with all that colder air pushing in. As that encounters the warm, moist, unstable air, it will create a line of thunderstorms in this whole region. So we have a very large slight risk all the way from Texas up into New York. A very expansive day of severe weather. In terms of intensity, definitely not as intense as Monday, but anywhere in this region, gusty winds and some hail is possible, and even a tornado risk. the largest hail risk does look to be across Texas. So that's the scoop with the storms. That's definitely the biggest deal, especially that tornado risk if we can get any of those long track tornadoes. With this very messy spring environment though, there are a lot of other concerns to cover. So we're going to go through a few other things before we wrap up this video. First of all, the wildfire risk is very high. In fact, we have a rare 3 out of 3 extremely critical risk across the panhandle of Texas, the panhandle of Oklahoma, and far southwestern Kansas. This extremely critical, this pink color is very rare, and this just means it's very volatile conditions for fire. If any fire starts, it could very rapidly spread and be dangerous to property out there. So we've already seen fires in this region yesterday with a day of extremely critical fire risk in place. So if you're in this region, take all the precautions you can to not do anything to inadvertently start a fire, dispose of cigarettes properly, don't drag any trailer chains across the grass, no burning of any kind for sure, and make sure you have an evacuation plan in place in case the worst happens, in case a fire goes near you. Make sure you have all your important documents easily accessible and ready to leave your house in as little as half an hour in case a fire breaks out. So in this whole region, we're worried about the fire risk, but especially in that pink shade, that's where extremely critical fire conditions are possible. Hey, can you believe it that just a few hundred miles up the road, we're going from fire concerns to a winter storm? We have a late season snowstorm across portions of the Rockies, Wyoming, portions of Utah, and Colorado. Moderate to even localized major impacts from winter storm, and some of the highest peaks are possible. So this is pretty late season, pretty unusual for this time of year, but we're talking about a few feet of snow and some of the highest peaks of elevation. So this is kind of that cold side to the weather system. We're already waking up to a pretty significant snow event in Wyoming. This will spread further south into Colorado through the day. Now most of the lower elevations will stay completely rain. Denver, you might see a few wet snowflakes, but no accumulating snow expected. But in much of the higher peaks across this region, some pretty significant snow. Snow levels will be around 4,000 to 5,000 feet. So something we're watching through the day tomorrow, also into early parts of Tuesday, before everything kind of fades out as we get Tuesday and Wednesday as our storm moves further east. So with that in mind, snowfall from this event, and some of these yellow and orange colors, that's where we could exceed 1 feet. The red color, that's where we can exceed 2 feet. Most of this is just in those highest mountain peaks, so it won't affect most people, but in places like Casper, we could get half a foot of snow. This is mainly impactful because this is late season. A lot of our trees have vegetation, so that means when the snow falls, it can break a lot of those branches with all that extra weight. And this could also cause power outages, so some impacts from that. But just people who aren't expecting snow this late in the season, especially after our recent warmth, don't let this catch you off guard and be prepared for a decent dusting out here in the Rockies. Alright, finally, let's talk temperatures, because we have some big temperature swings as our cold front comes in. We are looking at some of the temperatures in the plains today out ahead of that cold front being very warm into the 80s and 90s. Also look to the east coast though. We could have some records falling across the Atlantic seaboard. We could be in the low 90s all the way up to Washington DC, Philadelphia. When you combine that with the humidity, heat indices could approach triple digits in some spots here. So some early season heat across this region, but just widespread 80s with a lot of humidity across the eastern 2/3 of the country. Watch how that changes though once our cold front comes in. You can see it very clearly here over the central plains, and some cooler air will be moving in to the Midwest, to the central plains on Tuesday as that system and storms clear. 50s and 60s, some late season freezes across the northern plains. One more freeze possible perhaps across the Dakotas, and especially in the Rocky Mountains with some of that snow incoming. All this cooler air though will gradually filter on east. So we're talking about 50s and 40s waking up across the Midwest Wednesday morning, and those 80s are kind of shunted further to the south. Look at this. This is Thursday morning where we could have some 30s again in portions of the Midwest, and even New York, you could be down below 50 degrees. So a bit of a late season chill after the warm. So that's definitely a lot. There's a lot to track. We're talking about fire, severe, winter, big temperature swings. I do want to bring your attention briefly to the rest of the week. Even after the severe weather clears, it does look like we'll remain in an unsettled pattern across much of the central and eastern US. Now, middle of the week, the storms might be shifted a little bit further south, but across portions of the south from Texas down to the deep south, we could be looking at multiple additional rounds of rain as we go Wednesday, Thursday, and Friday. With any of these storms, there is a severe weather risk. It is May. After today, the severe weather risk does look lower, but certainly not zero, so any of these individual days could bring impacts. And then look at this. By the end of the week, rain could return for a much larger portion of the country again. Details still pretty low. We'll have a lot more information as we get closer, but just an early heads up that more impactful rain at the least, if not severe weather, is on the table. With a lot of rain in store, we're also getting increasingly concerned with a flood risk, especially in the south, Texas into the Arklatex region. This is kind of the bullseye that models have been hinting at. where we could get 4 to 6 inches of rain by the end of the week in these cities. So flooding will progressively become more of a concern as rounds of rain add up on each other. So something we're watching very closely, but even just across the broader country, a lot of rain is in store for the eastern 2/3, which is typical for May. It is a wet month, but we are just watching a flooding concern. So in summary, look at all these warnings in place. We have winter storm, freeze warnings in the Rockies. We have red flag warnings in the plains. We have a lot of wind alerts in the west. We're going to get some more severe weather alerts. It's a very busy time, so just make sure we're paying attention to the weather, especially in that severe weather risk. If you're in the moderate, potentially high risk, if that does happen, you're at highest risk for very impactful severe weather potential. Thanks all for watching. If you don't want to miss any updates to this evolving weather pattern, consider subscribing. But otherwise, hope you all have a great rest of your day, and I'll see you next time.